Welcome, one and all, to the Ferret and Raccoon podcast, episode 205. I am your one and only host for this podcast, the Angry Raccoon, bringing you the last podcast of November 2022. And as I'm sure some of you can already tell, I do have a bit of a sore throat and a blocked nose. I was unfortunate enough to be caught in the rain, as England has been hit by a lot of rain over the last couple of days. It's been quite heavy, quite frequent for the most part, and yeah, I didn't wear my scarf, so yeah, you can blame me, you can call me stupid. It was a stupid thing to do, but yeah, I'm facing the consequences right now because it's quite tricky to sleep with a blocked nose. But besides that, things have been pretty interesting over the last 2 weeks. I was going to do more things to talk about for this episode, as I'm sure you can already tell it's quite a short episode, but things didn't quite pan out. A lot of things came up both in my life and around the world. The fact that a particular website may implode or die or whatever you want to call it has kind of kept me a little busy, a little bit interested. I kind of do hope that that website does die. I'm not going to mention its name right now for the most part. We'll see what happens. But yeah, that's kind of kept me occupied. But the one thing I did do, besides being in the middle of a couple of shows that I've been watching, because I've been getting back into that, something I really missed. I've been watching TV shows, animated series, and I'm in the middle of a few, and it's been interesting for the most part, and I'm actually really enjoying that, being back in my routine for the most part, because I haven't done it, in a long time. But the one thing I did watch, because I recently remembered, thanks to the previous podcast, that I actually do have access to Disney+. So I actually watched Werewolf by Night, which is kind of a Marvel film, but it kind of isn't at the same time. And the base premise of this the base trailer of this film, because we did talk about the trailer a few podcasts ago, is that you kind of have a bunch of monster bounty hunter type characters, and they've all kind of gathered in this one place to essentially hunt down a particular monster. I guess a game of, I don't know, what's it called? I'm trying to think of the film, I guess it's kind of referencing. But yeah, they're all here, battle royale, whatever, to hunt down this one monster, because whoever catches and kills this monster gets this magic amulet, and they become the next grand monster hunter. The film doesn't really spend too much time explaining its lore within this concept, because it's very far removed from the Marvel superhero stuff, which is honestly one of the best parts about this film. And surprisingly enough, it's really well shot. It is in black and white, and I think it is a very obvious filter or conversion. I don't think they used film for this, like actual film that you would record footage on, not, different, film has a very broad term. And it is very interesting. Although it is a conversion, like I said before, there are some really nice and really beautiful shots. The action is really good, and it does have some moments. It has some really strong moments. It's probably one of the better Marvel films, if you can even call it that, to come out in the last few years. If you are sick of the whole Marvel formula and you don't want to have to do research and understand every single reference and all that, I would highly recommend this film, especially if you want something that's a little bit more old school in terms of it being more in line with, I guess, the Universal monster classic films, or just something that kind of leans a little bit more into more adult 18 plus horror type stuff. You're bound to find something you enjoy with this with this film, because I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun and worth your time. And yeah, it's not even really a film. It's like 50 minutes long. So yeah, shouldn't waste anyone's time. It's well worth the watch. But as I'm sure you can already tell, it's going to be a short episode because there just wasn't that much to really talk about, unfortunately. And like I've said many times on this podcast, I'm not going to add filler for the sake of having something to say. If there's only going to be 2 trailers, then there's only going to be 2 trailers like this episode. But the first one we're going to talk about is going to be for The Whale, which is a film where there has been a lot of buzz around it, mainly because of Bernard Fraser's performance. He received a standing ovation when the film was premiered at, I believe it's the Venice Film Festival, which, if you go and watch the clip, is like a 6-minute clip where after the film has screened, people were clapping for about 6 minutes, and Bernard Fraser himself is very, he's overjoyed. He's almost, he's basically crying because, if you got a standing ovation for your performance after X amount of years of not really being in your profession or your craft, yeah, you would get a bit emotional. So it's a nice scene, it's wonderful, and I'm actually happy for him that he's kind of received a lot of attention, a lot of praise, and he's kind of come back to some extent because he's always been a good actor. He's just not always been in a lot of films that I think people really would think of as it being not necessarily high art, because I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but he was kind of like a action movie star. Think of someone like Dwayne Johnson, who is, I guess, the guy you think of when you think of action blockbuster star. Bernard Fraser was kind of like that, except not as buff for the most part. But yeah, it is interesting to see an actor who I guess most people know from the Mummy films to kind of be in this interesting role, which we're going to talk about in a sec, because unfortunately he kind of became the face of certain specific Photoshop memes, and people were generally making fun of his appearance, which was quite awful for the most part. I mean, the moment a person of like certain amount of fame puts on a little bit of weight, it's an issue when they feel the need to be like nasty about it. I mean, for the record, the reason why most people do put on a lot of weight when they do get older is mainly because your immune system shuts down. You're going to need something for said viruses, God forbid, if you ever get them when you are of a certain age. And I know Bernard Fraser is not like 80 or anything, but more in terms of much later in life, it's best to put on said weight, because if you do get ill, said illness, virus, disease, whatever, it will have something to eat off, hence the fat. That's why a lot of older people are of quite larger size. That's why a lot of celebrities do put on the pounds. It's not because they're greedy sitting on their arse all day eating. And besides, there might be other reasons why someone may put on weight all of a sudden. It happens, and you just got to be respectful, or just, don't let it bother you for the most part. We're all going to get old, and, don't worry about it. But yeah, the trailer itself is very interesting. It's no surprise that A24 picked it up, because they are a stickler for trying to give us the best or the most interesting films. They've kind of been spearheading that for the most part, so it's always nice to see them bringing this film to more people. Nothing is really revealed in this trailer, which is good for the most part. I hate trailers that show too much. But there is a bleak undertone that can really be felt. Like, a lot of the shots really do linger on just nothing for the most part, or just very specific or cryptic shots. And based on Darren Aronofsky, who is directing this film, he did films like Mother and Black Swan, it's really hard to tell where this is going for the most part. Like, the music in the beginning is rather sinister, especially against that shot of Bernard's character, like standing in the distance behind a child on the beach. Not really sure what that is about. Is he gonna approach this child? It's really hard. I'm finding it hard to kind of articulate what exactly I think is going on, because there is another shot where you do see, I think, someone's legs standing by the water, and given that there are clear themes of death and maybe suicide, it's, kind of troubling to some extent. And, his breathless and raspy voice is really unique in, like, sound and tone. Like, I'm not sure if they put an effect on his voice, but yeah, it's kind of hard to listen to, but at the same time, you can actually feel just how much, not really how much suffering there is, but it feels like he's really pushing himself just to talk, which is even more tragic when you finally do see him with, the tubes up his nose, and that kind of brings me to the other side of this trailer, is towards the end, it takes a sadder and more tragic shift. Like I said before, death is clearly going to be a bit of a theme in here, but to what extent? Like, it may be obvious, but is Bernard Fraser dying? Like, what happened? Is he going to encourage people to... I don't know. See, that's the thing. It's a really tricky trailer to talk about, because there isn't much to say, and I don't really know how to be speculative. I don't know what to expect from it, is what I'm trying to say, for the most part. Like, it feels like it's going to be a roller coaster of emotions, but a slow burn at the same time. And if I know the American audience, they're not going to enjoy this. They like to see people dying and Americans always winning. But Bernard himself is so natural in this role. Like, his performance is very captivating in a very weird way, as there is like so much pain behind like just his stoic face and just how he looks. Like, he constantly looks like he's holding back tears, which makes sense if he is dying or is in a lot of pain, but that's something that's very hard to really display, especially if he's going to look like this throughout the whole film. And yeah, it's just a really interesting trailer. I am actually looking forward to it. It has my attention. I do hope that it's not going to be one of those films that's very like sappy or over manipulative in how it's trying to, get you to be sad or get you to cry. I partly don't think that's going to be the case given the director's previous work. And obviously I know a lot of people going, oh, Oscar buzz, and all that kind of stuff. Whether he'll win the Oscar, who knows? I'll have to see the film and decide for myself whether he or it is worthy of Oscar. But like I said before, I'm more than happy to have Bernard Fraser kind of see success after so long and kind of just, I was going to say stomp the haters, I don't know why. Yeah, just kind of be in the forefront, and hopefully he will be in more films delivering more fantastic performances if this is going to be a fantastic performance. But yeah, hopefully you guys liked that trailer. I did as well. Next trailer we have is more of a teaser trailer. That's the problem with this episode. A lot of the trailers are very, very short for the most part. The next trailer we're going to talk about is for Elemental, which is going to be Pixar's next, maybe, animated film. I'm not 100% sure because I can never keep track of what exactly Disney is releasing, because they tend to announce things and then they just release, and they sometimes don't advertise for them. Like, for example, with Zootopia Plus, which we talked about on the previous podcast, there has been very little promotion for that series, and I think people have kind of already forgotten about it. I'm not really seeing anyone really talking about it, even when it comes to artwork, because like I said on the previous podcast, it's something that obviously dealing with anthropomorphic characters, furries and people who do like that kind of stuff would be all about. Not really seeing anyone really chatting about it, but besides that, yeah, I think this is a strong teaser trailer. It's a really interesting concept. I'm going to put it on my watch list. I'm kind of anticipating it for the most part, although I have some things to say. Like, what I do like about this trailer is, of course, the animation. Like, it's Pixar. They are masters of movement for the most part. It looks great. The animations, the movements from the characters, but I'm not blown away by their movements. It's still a bit stiff. Some characters, I don't know if that's intentional because they are based on elements, and obviously some elements or characters would move a little bit more fluidly or a little bit stilted or stiff to some extent. So it's kind of hard to tell for the most part. And once again, which I'm going to, go back and remind, this is a concept. I don't think this animation or this trailer is going to be a part of the film. I think it was made for promotional sake. So I highly doubt they're bringing their A game for this, minute long, promotional animation. The tracking shot I really liked. I thought it was really cute to see Ember, I believe she's called, the fire character, kind of walking past all these characters whilst listening to music, kind of in her own zone. I think that's a great way to kind of introduce the world, kind of, set up the setting for the most part. And what was I going to say? Oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a sec. Sorry, I've got my cat in my room and she's doing things. Not showing her face was a clever detail, as like we're left almost like in anticipation or waiting for the face reveal to see what she actually looks like, or who this mysterious character is who just doesn't care about the world happening around her. And Ember herself, she looks great. I really like how they've like created or achieved like her constantly moving, shifting flames. I'm not sure how you would name that. It's an impressive visual for the most part, as she almost has like a spiky appearance, which is appropriate given that she is fire. I'm sure she's probably going to be hot-tempered or maybe a bit standoffish to some extent. I don't know. She kind of reminds me a bit of a teenage character, but we'll see. But yeah, although I am excited for this film, I do have my doubts. It is a concept, but it reminds me way too much of Zootopia. Like, they're elements that don't have physical forms. So why does it have to be like a cityscape? And even then, their world, although we only see like a small snippet of it, it's nothing interesting. It's just a city. It's not interesting. I can understand with Zootopia, it would make sense. It's animals instead of humans. They would build buildings like the ones we have. I don't really understand why elements need to be in tall skyscrapers and need a train system where I'm pretty sure most of them can fly, or at least teleport. Like, light and electricity should be able to move faster than a train. Obviously, they're not in this trailer, but it's a bit bizarre. I don't really get that. I don't know why you're trying to make this Metropolis-esque idea with things that, once again, don't have physical bodies. They can literally do anything, be anywhere. I don't know why you've grounded an idea or a concept or a character that can literally do anything to the confines of our own world. What, like, just for relatability? Because it's easy? It's just really weird and lazy. I know I'm taking a lot of issue with this, but it's just bizarre. Like, you would make your own world, right? You'd make a world that's alien to us, but normal to them. You know, I don't really get it. Like, why is their world not more abstract? It's strange. It's the first kind of red herring where I was like, you can't have these really interesting and somewhat beautiful looking characters and just confine them to a boring world like that. It doesn't work. It didn't work in Onward, and it's not working here. The humanoid elements, I think that's fine. You know, having a film, giving them personalities, giving them character, fine. Disney's pretty good at that. If they can somewhat do it successfully with cars and other things, then I'm sure it can work here. But some of these characters are ugly. Like, I'm not even going to lie. Like, they don't look appealing, or they're not very well designed. It seems like there's maybe a bit of a clash between trying to make them cutesy Disney anime style and then trying to make sure that you get what element they are. I mean, toys of them, no thank you. I can only really see an Ember toy happening, and even then, how do you even achieve that once again? Like, she's just fire or flames or heat. It's bizarre. And Wade, who is like the water element, who shows up at the end, he just looks off. Like, I'm not sure what they're going for with his facial features. Like, is he meant to look lopsided? If so, he comes across more as like an unfinished concept or a bit of animation. Like, I get he's liquid. He's obviously, his mouth isn't going to be straight. He's going to be constantly in motion or moving. I get that. But I feel like they haven't quite achieved a good middle ground with having a liquid formed character or body and having there being like a solidified aspect of him that you can actually understand, if that makes sense. It just doesn't work for me. And I think his face is just way too goofy. Like, this is meant to be the guy that Ember is going to fall in love with. I'm not buying it. And speaking of that, the whole opposites attract trope is like, it's super old at this point. Like, we really shouldn't be doing this. I understand it's a children's film and they're clearly just playing it safe for the most part, but there is very little you can do to make this fresh. And it's honestly just a bit disappointing when you look at the core aspects of what this film was going to be about, because visually, animation-wise, and aesthetically, there's some really cool stuff here. I do love how colourful the trailer was. I do love Ember's design. I do like the outfit she's wearing. There are great things here. There's lots of potential, but so far I'm not really that impressed. I do want to watch it because I hope that it's going to be a better film, but right now it's just really weird, and I can understand why people are a bit, already forgotten about the trailer and the film, because, yeah, it's whatever, and that's the problem. It shouldn't be. I shouldn't really be saying it's whatever in regards to a Pixar film about elements in a world, That's the problem. I don't think it's a matter of me getting older and not really liking Disney films or Disney formula. I think it's a lack of them or someone trying to take risks. Turning Red took a bit of a risk with some of the themes and some of the ideas it presented in there, but here it just feels like Disney film, which is not great when you have other studios doing a lot more and a lot more interesting things, such as DreamWorks and that, and Sony. I mean, for goodness sake, this film is going to go up against Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse 2. Think about how visually impressive that film was, or the previous one, I mean, and how visually impressive this film is going to be next to this Disney film about opposites attract. It's not good. But then again, who knows? Who knows? But yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap up the trailers I wanted to talk about. But I do have a discussion which I am going to test on this episode, and it is regarding November, because of course, remember November. And it is going to be, I don't really have, it's a working title name. I've just called it Aged Like Fine Wine. But the base premise is we are going to talk about media that we feel that has aged really well or has become more relevant since its initial release. So I've got 3 I'm going to quickly go over because I'm not going to go into massive details because spoilers, and also it's just me. I don't really want to just talk about that. I want to have a little bit more of a discussion despite it only being me on said discussion. But the first thing I want to mention is going to be Fight Club, of course. I forget the person who directed it, David Fincher. I don't know, my mind went blank there for a sec. Directed by David Fincher. Interesting and fantastic film that has become very relevant over the last couple of years. I've noticed a lot of people have been discussing it, have been making videos about some of its deeper meanings and how, once again, relevant it's become in later years, mainly regarding certain aspects and issues regarding men for the most part. I sound quite sinister right there because my voice is going, that's why. It's an interesting film. If you haven't watched it, please watch it. If you've never watched it, actually, don't look up anything. Just please watch it. Because a lot of people like to talk about certain things that happen in this film. And I remember when I first watched it, I was so glad that I didn't know what was going on. But it is an interesting film. I would say if you are struggling to kind of fathom certain things going on in your life, in the world, based on how people are treating certain people and all that kind of stuff, and you are a male, I would highly recommend it. It should affect you in the right way, for the most part. The next one I want to talk about is going to be an episode, and that is going to be from the series Courage the Cowardly Dog. And the episode I'm going to mention is going to be The Mask. Now, this is another episode or another bit of media that I think has gained a little bit more attention over the last couple of years. People who I imagine initially watched it when they were younger, kind of coming back to it and going, oh, that's what it was about. I don't want to spoil this episode too much, but if you never watched Courage the Cowardly Dog, it's basically weird, creepy, wacky shenanigans happening to a dog and his 2 elderly owners in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's like monsters, aliens, that kind of stuff. I highly recommend that series. It's a classic Cartoon Network show. But this episode in particular is very interesting, and it's always been one of my favorites because it starts with, Courage, who is our main character, and his elderly, Eustace and Muriel, who are his owners, essentially answering the door to a character dressed in a white veil, wearing a very big, almost like those theatre masks. It's kind of got like a normal, smiling, somewhat blank face. And she comes in. I'm going to skip some details because I want people to watch the episode. And she comes in and she kind of talks about it, but she is very dismissive and very awful to Courage, making some very snide comments about how dogs are all the same and how they're all this and all that. Very nasty stuff, and we don't know where exactly it's coming from. And part of the reason regarding her behavior is that we later find out that the character behind said mask is actually in a bit of a abusive relationship with another character. Now, the character in question is a dog, a male dog, and he is depicted as awful and evil. He's got red eyes, he's got spiked collar, he's got sharp teeth, and he's just generally not nice to this character. And there's one scene in particular that I think most people look at and reference is the fact there's this awful scene where both the characters, they're on the couch, and the character behind the mask kind of just slumped. They're just on the couch, and it's like very dingy and dark. It's a very unpleasant scene. There is a sense of like awfulness, and it's a very uncomfortable scene, even for a children's show. But it's very effective because even as a child, I could tell that, yeah, this was not a great situation for our main character or the character behind the mask to be in. And I do applaud Courage the Cowardly Dog for actually having an episode kind of focus or at the very least reference something like that, even if it's something that children can look at and kind of go, oh, this is an abusive relationship or a bad relationship, or this is not good for the most part. There is a happy ending at the end, which is very interesting, again, because it also is another example of this series being way ahead of its time and being quite progressive in terms of what happens and how we resolve the situation. But it's an episode I would highly advise everyone to go and watch because it's fantastic, and Courage the Cowardly Dog is top tier, in my opinion. And the last thing I want to talk about is going to be for a bizarre show that I think only people who were around at the time maybe remember, and if younger children probably won't remember, although if you are younger, you shouldn't be listening to this podcast. is going to be for Dick and Dom in the Bungalow, which was a Saturday morning children's TV series which ran for, I think, about 5 or 6 years in the early 2000s. And I've been watching a lot of episodes in my spare time, kind of keeping it in the background, because some wonderful and lovely people have been uploading their VHS recordings of said episodes. And to all those people who have, thank you. You are amazing. I really appreciate it. To all those people, they'll probably never hear this, but much respect to them for doing so. And yeah, it's an interesting show. Even kind of going back to it, I kind of thought to myself, oh man, it's probably going to be outdated. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. It holds up really well. I honestly think if you put that on for a child to watch, I think they would have a blast and enjoy it, because it is just a great children's show. And I should kind of explain the rough premise behind it for those of you who maybe are outside of England or are too young to have remembered or watched it. The base premise follows our two, I guess, presenters, if you want to call them that, Dick and Dom, that being Richard McCaw and Dominic Wood, who essentially hosts this sort of game show slash sketch show slash variety show slash competition, where essentially 6 children come into the Bungalow, and they're essentially here to earn points by doing certain challenges and certain games to win prizes at the end of the episode. And a lot of the games they do play, which I should mention, they call them bungalow heads, which is quite funny. They kind of come in through the front door, they're introduced, they kind of like have a little bit of a gag or a little bit of joke with them, and they kind of play certain games. Some of the more famous ones, and this is where it kind of gets into the more silliness and the more, I was about to say avant-garde, but it's not quite avant-garde, just bizarre and kind of gross games where they have dinner ladies like throwing like mashed up food at them and they have to catch it in their bowls to then eat it. And other just really bizarre games where they have to do things like having to make their own breakfast, cook their own breakfast and stuff like that. Even just a few episodes I watched, they put them in straitjackets and they have to get out of said straitjackets, or they have to paint themselves a certain animal in a certain amount of time, and other really just fun, bizarre games that are really entertaining even for an adult to watch, and I think would be entertaining for children to watch and do. Like one such example is the power goes out in the bungalow and they have to go down to the basement or cellar and they have to ride bikes in what they call this liquid or whatever, or gunge or whatever, called creamy muck muck. And essentially they have to ride the bikes, and as you ride the bike in the creamy muck muck, it just sprays all over them. There's another really fun game where they have to, essentially, they have like 2 adults and they have to put armor on them. It's essentially bungalow battle bots. And once they've put the armor on them, these grown adults who have now been dressed up by children have to fight for the opposing teams. What's another really fun game? Oh, some more iconic and fun games. They have Baby Race, where they essentially take babies who can't exactly walk but they can crawl, and they essentially have them race on a track. The children essentially bet on who they think is going to win the race, with one parent on one side essentially letting their babies go, and the other parent or friend on the other side kind of like tempting the children with like keys or toys. It's so bizarre to watch, but it's actually extremely entertaining because you don't know what's going to happen. Babies are incredibly unpredictable. Typically what will happen is you'll get one baby that will just crawl part of the way and just stop there, flip around and just look around, and it's honestly quite hilarious for the most part. And it's just such a really interesting and bizarre concept for a game show. And also each episode does end with a creamy muck muck finale where they're just basically throwing this orange or yellowy custard stuff at each other. The set is ruined, everyone is covered in it, the cameras get covered in it. It's a blast. And that's like the rough outline of an episode. Although, you know, Dick and Dom, as well as the production team and everyone else who worked on that show, they do go and above to kind of add a great sense of variety. It's not just these games and silliness and just gunge and all that. They often do change out games, they keep it fresh, they never play a game for too long. They often go outside and film things outside of the bungalow. For example, one of the most famous things they've done is a game called Bogies, which is where both of them go out to a public place and they each have to take it in turns to shout or scream the word bogeys, each time getting louder and louder until one person is, decides they don't want to do it anymore, or one person can't shout as loud as the other. It's a bizarre, but it's a hilarious concept that is made even more funny with the fact that they get almost like professional, like BBC commentary to have him basically talk about, them screaming or shouting bogeys. And it's very professional. They take it very seriously. And even with that game, they kind of constantly evolved and kept it fresh, where they had Premier League bogeys, where they went to places that, as they put it, people wouldn't dare to play bogeys. One of the most noteworthy examples, or infamous examples, is they went to a theatre play, and basically got to the point where they were shouting and screaming bogeys while people are unfortunately trying to perform. They also had parent bogeys, where children would have their parents essentially go up against them, celebrity bogeys, and grandparents bogeys. It was all great stuff, and even other things as well, like the neighborhood cat, who was a puppet. He would go to just random parts of England just to explore these tiny little towns that no one has ever heard of. So if you're someone who wants to see or learn more about England, that's a segment you definitely want to go and watch. As well as, what was the other concept I was thinking about? All the other characters that do appear as well, that kind of were engraved in the universe that was Dick and Dom in the Bungalow, like Harry Bat, who was like a police officer who kind of came in and interrogated characters. The prize idiot, who essentially was their next door neighbor, wearing, a purple vest, shop, flip-flops, and he was just an absolute idiot. And just other really great stuff that... It's just such a bizarre show, and I must sound like a mad person talking about this show, but I honestly do recommend giving it a watch if you've never watched it before, or if you haven't watched it in years, because in my opinion, I do think it actually really holds up. I don't understand why the BBC hasn't just put those episodes on iPlayer and just let people watch them again. It may be because they might be somewhat embarrassed about the context of the show. I know the BBC has become very snobbish over the last few years. That might be the reason why. And it is worth noting that this show, all these things I've talked about, all this bizarre weirdness, that show won awards. It won a BAFTA, for goodness sake. It ran for 5 seasons and it won a BAFTA. It's incredible when you think about that, and it's just a really good show. And on another quick note as well, I watched an episode literally yesterday, where they had one recurring joke where they would have the children essentially watching the TV, because in between the show, a cartoon is played. And that's like a good excuse for them to kind of get things set up, and obviously a nice break and adding to the variety show aspect of it. They would essentially try and scare the children by essentially playing a loud scream. And obviously, as they kept doing this, the children who would eventually appear in the episode, they knew because they'd watched the show from previous weeks. One episode in particular, they did it because you can actually see one child actually knows what's about to happen. They try and cover their ears, but they still get them. They do the scream, the children kind of get scared, and then they have someone in a costume jump out from behind the sofa and then scare the children again. I kid you not, in that episode, a child is so scared they basically have a heart attack. It is, I know I shouldn't laugh, but it is like one of the funniest things I think I've seen this year. Just to see Dick and Dom's reaction to just this child who's now clutching at their heart or their chest, basically lying on the ground as they kind of panic to pick him up, and they kind of bring the camera over, and that child just disappears for a couple minutes. Oh god, it's hilarious. That show was a mess at points because they often wouldn't tell Dick and Dom what was about to happen. So a lot of what makes that show funny is just the bizarre, unplanned, messy, chaotic nature of the show. And I think it is a true testament to the whole idea of sometimes improv, and I guess the saying of never work with children, why it's created some of the funniest stuff on British TV, in my opinion. And yeah, that's going to be my recommendations. I would recommend all 3 of those things, especially the whole series of Courage the Cowardly Dog. And yeah, I know I talked a lot about that series, but I've been really enjoying it for the most part. It's been a nice distraction and a nice break from the harshness of the world right now. But yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap up this episode, but we've got the video of the episode, and kind of sticking with the nostalgia theme of November, the video of the episode is going to be 2 videos because I couldn't decide between the 2, and that is going to be from Brockhampton with Swamp and Junky. Now, the reason I've put these 2 songs, or at least, whichever one you want to watch, is because Brockhampton, America's favorite boy band, rap group, they're going to be releasing, or no, scratch that, by the time this podcast goes out, they would have released their last studio album as a collective. So in honor of them and everything they've done over the last 6-5 years, I wanted to kind of go back and kind of link you to an artist who I think has done a lot for the music industry over the last couple of years, and kind of just look back and kind of just, if you've never heard of them, definitely give them a listen. But yeah, I'm going to recommend them because I think they deserve the spot. But yes, as I said before, that is pretty much going to wrap up this episode. We only have 2 episodes left before the end of the year, including the best and the worst of 2022. It's coming up quickly. We've only got 2 podcasts left to do in December. I actually can't believe it. So stay tuned for that. But I guess I will... Oh, before I end this podcast real quick, I should mention this. I have to come clean real quick. So on the previous podcast, I did say that I was going to be live streaming on my other YouTube channel, and I kind of didn't, technically. Essentially what happened was I was all ready to actually do the live stream on the 11th of November, but chaos ensued and my equipment wasn't working. I don't know what's going on, but the method I was trying to do, it just didn't work. I couldn't get it to connect. I was all set up. I had done technically some connections and that I was all ready. It just didn't work. I tried for about half an hour and it just didn't work. So I'm sorry to everyone who may have been interested or was looking forward to it. It didn't happen. I'm a bit annoyed about it, but I think I know what the problem is. We're going to put a pin in this idea for the most part. The channel will remain. I do intend to at least try and do regular live streams, but I think given the fact that we are so close to the end of the year and there's so much work to do, there's so many games and TV shows and films that I want to catch up with, it might have to happen at some point next year. So I'm going to apologize for that. We'll see what happens in the future, but I wanted to get off my chest just in case and for the record. But yes, on that note, I guess I will end this podcast like I always do by saying I was the Angry Raccoon. Excuse me, I don't know. Sorry, my voice is going. And I will see you on the next podcast.